And where we left off with the question, maybe there's a better way. And obviously there are many better ways than Michael in the office offers us. When we think in terms of diversity, I mean, we can take diversity as a given, right? And we can look at then, okay, so we are a diverse people. Across this planet, we're a diverse people. Within our country, we have a high level of diversity, as much as perhaps any country on the planet. Can we use this diversity to some advantage? That is, and this is where we get to the third approach to diversity. So we had affirmative action, we had valuing diversity. Now we're going to talk about managing diversity. And this is creating the organizational changes that enable all people to perform to their potential. And I want to get back to what I was talking about. This isn't about skin color. This isn't about gender. We're going to go a little deeper and think in terms of diversity as it represents utility to our business, right? So in this case, we're going to hire people, we're going to promote people, and we're going to place people not looking at these superficial characteristics and looking at skills, attitudes, fit to the organization's needs within a given position. So we kind of shed this kind of obvious diversity and move to a diversity that can enhance our business potential. And there's not a metaphor for managing diversity yet. I'm going to say that maybe it's fine dining, if you will. I mean, if we're going to sit down to a wonderful dinner, right, that there may be a first course, a second course, a main course, a dessert, and the meal is planned from beginning to end, and it has diverse elements that fit together in a way that truly creates a fine dining experience. So when we start concentrating on knowledge, skills, abilities, and other qualities in people, we can place people in a manner that's diverse, but that enhances our business model and creates a better experience for all the employees and creates a better experience for the customer. So that's really what we're looking at there, is understanding diversity, but understanding it at a useful level rather than a superficial level. So competing theories, well, there are competing theories, and social categorization theory. What we do know, and social identity theory would be kind of a spin-off of this as well, similarities and differences provide the basis for group categorization. And we like gender differences, we like ethnic differences in this regard because we can spot the differences at a distance and we can categorize members as us or them very simply. And this goes all the way back in human beings. You know, back when Neanderthals and Cro-Magnon were cohabitating, you know, we could look across a pasture, a prairie or something, because they look, there's a Neanderthal over there, so I better stay away, or I better exploit them, or whatever our relationship as a Cro-Magnon to Neanderthal was at that time, right? But it's something that we do automatically and outside of awareness quite often. Differences tend to be exaggerated between groups because then it makes it easier. And there's certain bonuses, especially to self-esteem. In-group favoritism versus out-group derogation. And so that it becomes very clannish, if you will, with that word. Now, information decision-making theory takes a slightly different approach, and they say diverse groups possess a wider range of knowledge, experience, and perspective. And again, if we look at the McDonald's example in part 1, it's a pretty easy problem to solve. Why aren't Hispanics eating in McDonald's as much as other ethnicities? Well, the physical layout was kind of taking the pleasure out of going out to eat for them. Who can recognize this? Well, someone who's Hispanic and used to eating in a large family. Now notice it could have been done probably with Italian Catholics as well, which historically have had large families in the past, but maybe not as much as Hispanics do at this point in time. Decisions are superior from heterogeneous groups, and that is the more inputs and the more perspectives that are involved. Remember, when you're doing a brainstorming session, if everyone is the same, your brainstorming list stands to be pretty damn short. But when you have a diverse group, the hope is that that brainstorming list expands, right? Creativity might be enhanced because people are suggesting things that maybe would just go under the radar with kind of a homogeneous group. Now, Let's talk about barriers and challenges, and we're going to talk about homework 11 as we move through this portion here. So inaccurate stereotypes and prejudice is a tremendous barrier, right? Ethnocentrism, my group is better, is a tremendous barrier to managing diversity, right? Valuing diversity, if you will. Poor career planning. And note that sometimes people have more advantages bestowed on them because of where they grew up and where they lived, right? You know, in Van Nuys, when I grew up, there was 2 middle schools. There was Van Nuys Junior High and there was Robert Fulton. Okay, Robert Fulton was in a predominantly white neighborhood, and it was a wealthier neighborhood. Van Nuys Junior was south of the railroad tracks and was in a less wealthy neighborhood. Van Nuys Junior High was less desirable than Robert Fulton for teachers, etc. So the quality of the education can be argued was a little better at Robert Fulton. So imagine getting prepared for high school. You're in junior high, you're preparing for high school. If you go to a better school, then it causes you to have an advantage when you go on to high school and subsequently when you go on to college, right? Well, sometimes we need to address these disparities in juvenile education, right? Because they play out in terms of qualifications on the job. So what kind of training systems do we want to instill, right, that maybe level the playing field? What kind of career counseling do we want to use to help people plan careers? Some people just simply don't. How many of you are the first in your family to go to college? You know, and at Columbus State we recognize this, and the first years, right? The first in their family are like pioneers. But when they go home at the end of the day, do they have someone there to advise them on how to negotiate college? Note that there's an advantage that comes with socioeconomic status and having people in your family who've been to college before. They can help you select, they can help you negotiate the issues you're having, they can give you better advice than people who haven't been in college. So, to what extent do we want to enhance people's ability to plan their careers? What if the work environment is hostile or unsupportive, right? And I felt for this woman, Denise, at the paper mill. She was the first hourly worker, union worker at our Wallula mill to bid into the quality control department. And Denise kind of stuck out. This is Wallula, Washington. This is Eastern Washington. And there were not a lot of African Americans in the mill. Of 500 employees, there was probably a dozen African American employees. And here's Denise, who bids into the quality control department, which was a plum job for a union member. It was a great job, right? And she had braids, and she just visually didn't fit in. And being kind of an old school mentality in a paper mill of all places, it's like Denise had to do everything twice as well as everyone else to be found acceptable, that she was being held to a different standard based on the fact that she was a woman that was minor in comparison to being a black woman at this time. And I felt for Denise. Fortunately, I was her supervisor, so you know, we could buffer the impact of some of the situations. So we could work to make the work environment less hostile, if you will. There might be a lack of potential savvy for the diverse employees. They don't necessarily know how to play the game or see the value in playing the game. It's not something that they grew up observing their parents do or talk about, right? Through no fault of their own. So, the difficulty in balancing career and family issues. So now diversity comes in a different way. How big is my family? Am I a woman? Am I going to get pregnant? I'm going to try and balance my responsibilities. And we know even when women work, they're have to take on these responsibilities. How did my mom balance it with me and her? Well, fortunately, my mom was a casting director, and she made pretty good money, so that she could actually hire help, right? So there was a woman who lived with us from the time I was about, 5 to about 12. Cookie lived with us on Monday through Friday, and then she would go home to her home on the weekends. But my mom was able to do that because she had the money. A lot of working women don't have that kind of career that allows them to have that kind of money to then hire someone to watch their kids. So my mom could pursue her career full bore because of this. Other women are not necessarily so lucky, or single fathers might be in the same issue. Fears of reverse discrimination often infect an organization. They say, oh my God, people are getting advantages because they're minorities. That is, we're being discriminated against because we're white or because we're male, right? And it's all right. So, and again, in personnel psychology, when we talk about rank ordering people on the basis of their performance on legitimate assessment instruments, then reverse discrimination and discrimination become less and less of an issue. Some organizations don't see diversity as a priority. For example, when I was, again, at the paper mill, my boss, Chuck, came to me and he said, Mark, you're adopted, right? And I said, yeah, Chuck, it's no secret, I'm adopted. And he said, you said that you didn't know who your father was, and at that time, that was true. I do now, but I didn't at the time. And he said, your mother was half Swiss and half Portuguese. And I say, well, I mean, that's her ancestry. She's born in the United States, right? So, but yeah, you know, she comes from Portuguese stock and Swiss stock. And then Chuck looks at me and he says, well, Portuguese, wait for this. He says, Portuguese, that's Hispanic, isn't it? And I'm like, Chuck, I don't think that Portuguese is Hispanic. I think, you know, Spanish and Portuguese, that's European, and I think that's the deal. I don't think. And he says, yeah, I'm pretty sure Portuguese is Hispanic. And I said, okay, that's fine. I don't want to argue about this. And he says, and so you're a quarter Portuguese. And I said, well, okay, fine. Yeah, I'm a quarter Portuguese. And he said, that's almost a third. And I said, well, yeah, you know, specific math aside, I guess so. And he said, well, you know what that means? If you're a third Hispanic, we can count you. And I said, count me as what? And he says, well, now you're a minority. Now you're a minority within the organization, within the department. So we get points for that we have an additional minority person. I said, Chuck, I really don't think I'm a minority. I think I'm just pretty damn white. I mean, that's the deal. They counted me anyway. Diversity wasn't seen as a priority. It was seen as a game at the paper mill to defeat or to get around or somehow cheat, right? Unfortunate. And you can see how people become disgruntled after a while. So we can revamp organizational performance appraisal systems, and this can go a long way to reducing some of the barriers, right? And make the challenge equal to people as they're trying to promote or move to new jobs. We have to overcome resistance to change, and some people are old school and they just don't want to change. This is the way it's always been. This is the way I want it to be. And notice, it's very easy to assume that position when you are the advantaged group. So when we look at something like the glass ceiling that's preventing women from attaining certain management positions, the white men that, you know, operate the system, they can be largely okay with that because it's a way that they defend their turf, so to speak. So, that being said, let's return to our three approaches to diversity: affirmative action, valuing diversity, managing diversity, and let's start putting some labels, some general kind of perceptions on those three approaches to diversity. Affirmative action is quantitative. It's about counting first and foremost. So we're going to use stock statistics, we're going to use flow statistics, we're going to count people as Hispanic even if they aren't necessarily, right? But it's about counting, it's about numbers, it's about ratios, okay? Now valuing diversity on the other hand is qualitative, and it's like, I like having a diverse organization. I like walking in and I like seeing people that are different than me. I like walking into an organization knowing I'm making a difference in my community, right? And maybe helping people who wouldn't normally get jobs or whatever, or be disadvantaged. So I like it, right? Now, managing diversity, we're going to shed kind of the outside markers of diversity and start using assessment practices and training programs that better qualify people to their positions, so it becomes more behavioral, right? Affirmative action was legally driven, and the EEOC has some enforcement power over this. Valuing diversity is ethically driven. It is just like, hey, I believe this to be the right thing to do. Now, managing diversity is strategically driven. We understand that diversity carries with it benefits, and we're going to hire people who are diverse as a way to enhance our business. Now, affirmative action was designed to be remedial, that is, make up for past wrongs. Valuing diversity is idealistic. It's kind of the kumbaya approach of the bunch. Managing diversity is pragmatic. Let's just get down to business, right? And let's do things that make sense. Okay? The assimilation model, remember the melting pot? Okay, that's affirmative action. The diversity model, the tossed salad, is valuing diversity. The synergy model, cool word, big word in organizations in this day and age, is about fine dining. That's the metaphor I'm trying to float. Maybe you got a better one. What do we know about affirmative action? Well, it opened the door. It opened the door to organizations. People started being hired that wouldn't normally have been hired before, right? Now, valuing diversity opens minds, attitudes, and culture. So it kind of blows the lid off and it says, look, we are diverse. Let us celebrate it. Now, managing diversity opens the system, because what I'm talking about is systemic change. And Deming would love this, right? Because we're going to hire the people who are the most qualified. We're also going to institute training programs to increase our workforce's capacity and capability, right? So it opens up the system, and it starts treating the system as a system. Okay? Now, what are some generic action options? This comes from R. Roosevelt Thomas Jr. Well, what can we observe? And none of these aren't necessarily ideal. This is just what is possible, what we might see. We might include or exclude, decreasing or increasing diversity numbers in an organization by choice, right? Hey, denial, is always a way to approach things. What, there's no diversity problem. I don't even want to hear about it. There's no difference, no problem. Just leave me alone. Assimilate. In this approach, what we're doing as a generic action option is we're going to now try to make everyone the same. So we're going to stress homogeneity. We're all one big team. Rah. We can suppress. We can squelch or discourage complaints or suggestions. So we can find ways to shut people up, so to speak. Those squeaky wheels that want the grease, what we do is we remove the potential. Other generic options, we can isolate, set aside, reassign, give special projects or duties. So we have this diverse member that's making other people uncomfortable for whatever reason because of their presence. So what do? We shove them to the side. We find something. We don't fire them, right? We don't limit their pay, but what we do is we find opportunities where they interact less with everyone else. We tolerate, and tolerate's a good and bad word. I mean, tolerance, yeah, is a good thing, but tolerance also kind of develops or grows out of this one-up attitude. I tolerate those below me, right? Because they're different. I don't appreciate them. I don't necessarily enjoy. I tolerate them. So it's kind of iffy word, right? We acknowledge a difference, but not value or accept those differences. And we certainly don't manage or use them to any advantage. Now, or in our organization, we can work to build relationships through acceptance, through understanding, right? And we can foster mutual adaptation, adapt or change views, generally motivated by acknowledgement of mutual benefit, that we will be richer from being with each other and sharing our diversity. We're in an option to learn from each other. So now from Morrison, some recommendations: education, always at the top of the list of any recommendation. Enforcement, and we have to enforce not necessarily from the outside, that is like the EEOC making enforcement issues on businesses, but we have to do it within. And part of a manager's toolkit should be, how do they approach diversity, demonstrate it, and how do you enforce it in middle managers, etc. And then exposure. And the idea is, as we expose ourselves to greater and greater levels of diversity, we become just accepting of it to a greater and greater extent. And so you can see these three pieces, these three E's from Morrison, can go a long way into helping us learn how to manage diversity within an organization to the ultimate benefit of the employees, management, and the customers. Okay. So homework 11, what are we going to look at? What is the barrier challenge that you've chosen for this assignment? So that's the first thing you're going to answer. And remember, there was a list of barriers earlier in the lecture. Now, what is a scenario or situation? And in this case, You can craft your own scenario or situation, or I was thinking that you can also do this from one of your team members if they've had a situation that looked like the barriers and challenges that we had earlier in the lecture. And then, third point, I want you to apply the Holy Trinity. What need is demonstrated in the described scenario or situation? So is there a need? And I always want us to return back to this idea. We just don't simply do things on a whim. We do things because needs assessment demonstrates that there is an issue that needs to be addressed. Is it an individual need, or is it indicative of multiple actor needs? So is it just one person who's suffering necessarily within the organization, maybe in a diversity-related issue? Or is it systemic? Is it happening to more than one person? Big question for needs assessment is, how can you know? How can you find out? And that is kind of the core to needs assessment. How the hell do I figure out if there's a need at all, right? And when I talk about it, remember when I first brought up this idea of needs assessment, program design, and program evaluation, that was a 3-course sequence that I took. So needs assessment is a course in and of itself, the techniques we use to establish and then report on need. Okay? Now, number 4, application of Holy Trinity. Once again, what's one thing that can be done to address the need is described in number 3. This is the potential program design. What are we going to do about it? The design program is most consistent with which of the 3 approaches to diversity. So whatever you guys cook up as your program design, your way to ameliorate the need, right? Would you say that it is more coming from a position of valuing diversity, managing diversity, or adhering to affirmative action guidelines, right? And then explain to me why. Okay, your rationale for categorizing it as such. 5, application of the Holy Trinity. How will we know the program addressed is going to be successful? And that's what the program evaluation is. All 3 elements, absolutely critical. We have to know how it worked. And when you build the program, remember, you build the assessment. So assessing the need just flows naturally. It's the evaluation. What measures were employed to make sure that this made a difference? We need at least 3 measures. The best measurement practices employ multiple measures, right? So if I have a group of employees who are disadvantaged, let's say on the basis of gender, and I create some policy changes, one slam dunk, and I know I'll give this to you. One slam dunk is an employee satisfaction survey. Has satisfaction increased as a result? That is post-program, right? And there can be certain questions on there that can be very pointed. To what extent do you feel the quality of opportunity in the organization has improved for you over the past 6 months? Not at all to very much, right? So crafting a good survey is part of the deal. We'll talk more about that specifically later in the course, right? And then let's do 6, and this is the feel-good part. It's a brief conclusion, no longer than a paragraph, okay? And what I want you to do then is summarize what we talked about. It reiterates the barriers and challenges selected, with the scenario. So hey, this is what was going on, this is the barrier or the challenge, describes the identified need, we discovered that we need to do this, this is how we addressed it, then this is how we demonstrated that we were successful in addressing it. Closes right with a brief description of how work circumstance and based on our successful application of this program, we now are at this new point, right? So it's kind of that take-home point, and this is something that's going to be used in memos that are transmitted throughout the company. Very common practice. Summarize it down to a paragraph or 2. And that's it for this one. So we got our homework assignment, we got the approach to diversity, and there you go. Go Bucks. I know Psych of Emotion is where I use the OHIO display on the front end, but I thought it would be cool to use it on the back end, at least this one time in this class. So you guys have a great day. There's homework 11 for you, and believe it or not, we're on the downside now. We're approaching the end of the course. So I hope you have a great day. Stay healthy, stay safe. Bye-bye.